I'm Karen Shire. I'm the coordinator, organizer of Network G on labor markets, education, and human resources. And I'm very, very pleased that we have this Author Meets Critics session as our opening session for the SACE meetings here, the 22nd SACE meetings here in Amsterdam. And it's a very important topic, I would say one of the central topics in labor market studies, how youth enter labor markets and what happens when they don't. And the title of this book, I think, gives us already a clue, Social Exclusion of Youth in Europe, the Multifaceted Consequences of Labor Market Insecurity. Our plan is for the 4 editors of this book and co-authors who were part of a European project to introduce the book in about 20 minutes, I think. And then we have 4 critics who each have up to 15 minutes to comment generally on the book, and they'll also focus on specific chapters. So I think you'll have a very good idea of what this book is about if you haven't had a chance to read it already. So I'm going to give Marta this microphone because this one is hard to turn off. This one you can turn off if you don't want to be recorded. And I'll leave it here so that those who come and join you can take it as they need. So please begin. And please do introduce yourselves. I didn't do that, but I think it's best, given that we have 8 people, that you all introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Karen. I'm Marge Unt. I'm a professor of comparative sociology at Tallinn University, and I will open this as we are here like 4 editors of this book, so we all get a floor for 5 minutes. And try to give some highlights from the book before we continue with discussions. And I'm very pleased to be here with Dirk Hofaecker, Gebel, and Sonia Bertolini, and our 4th editor, Vassiliky Deliyanni-Kouimtzis, is unfortunately not here, but we are very lucky to have also authors, Valentina and Katri, here with us. So. And now it's.
This microphone is fine too on the desk.
Okay, so I put it. Yes, I put away because it's. And I will just shortly say what are the central research questions of this book, what we aim to answer. First of all, we looked at the consequences of labor market insecurity. So it's very important also to look of drivers of youth unemployment, what has been done a lot, but also as many young people experience in early career labor market insecurity, we concentrated what kind of consequences it has on their different life domains. And as we could draw from youth own voices, we also looked at the coping strategies they apply and also asked what kind of policies mitigate these negative effects of labor market insecurities. And in this presentation, we concentrate on this first research question. And before I give floor to our co-editors, I just say a few words about our general analytical framework. Each chapter applied more specific theories and questions, but it all was framed in this way that we concentrated on job insecurity and labor market exclusion and how this relates to 3 outcomes in youth process of becoming adult. And these outcomes were well-being and health, autonomy, and also economic consequences. And we were interested not only about immediate consequences, but when possible also these consequences over the life course. And in this, it's also important how young people perceive, how they cope, and what's the role of families and communities in it. And as we all in this project were comparative researchers, for us it's very important also this institutional context, how the same processes actually differ across institutional context, and what are the policies which help to mitigate those negative consequences. I will not go into detail due to time, what kind of different approaches we used, but so we applied quantitative and qualitative approaches. And in this sense, this book is very rich, and I hope gives a good also toolbox in this respect. In terms of data, we draw from European microdata at individual level, European social survey, and European statistics on income and living conditions, and also qualitative expert interviews for long-term consequences. And I think very unique aspect of this, what we could do due to large-scale comparative project funded by European Union, that we were able to collect 386 qualitative interviews with young people in Bulgaria, Estonia, Germany, Greece, Italy, Poland, Sweden, Ukraine, and the UK. So this was something we could draw on in this book heavily as well. So I will hand over now to Michael about well-being and health, please.
Yeah, hi, I'm Michael Gebel, Professor of Methods of Empirical Social Research at the University of Bamberg. And I just highlight some main findings on the domains of well-being and health. First of all, some words about the measurement. We measured both aspects from a subjective perspective to also align the qualitative and the quantitative part. In the quantitative part, we had a subjective assessment of general health, and regarding the well-being, we looked at the cognitive component of life satisfaction, but also affective components of happiness. And what we find in some chapters where we had this specific look at the well-being and health is that these labor market insecurities reduce particularly life satisfaction and happiness. They less affect the subjective health. And we find these effects compared to the reference group of people who are employed and also in the permanent positions. And if we compare the effects between being unemployed as the strongest dimension of labor market exclusion to job insecurity measured in terms of temporary employment, we find that the strongest effect for unemployment, whereas temporary employment, at least with regard to well-being and health, more resembles the character of permanent work. We still find some disadvantages, but not so strong as compared to unemployment. And this also resembles the recent research that even was published now after our book. We not only look at the effect of experiencing labor market insecurities at individual level and what it implies for this individual who is affected by it. We also had one nice chapter by our Swedish colleagues who looked at the effects with European EU Silk data, how unemployment, transitions to unemployment affect the situation of the partner. And we find that they find that it's not only individual health affected, but also the partner's health. Of course, these so-called crossover effects, so from one person to the other one, are stronger for, are not as strong as the effect of experiencing unemployment yourself, but still prevalent. And we also looked at, in these different chapters, at different moderators. We probably get to that in the discussion. So I just mentioned it. We looked how it's moderated by the country context. We looked also at gender difference, where we found, for example, stronger effect for men compared to women. But from looking more into the mechanism, we had this interesting finding that the loss of income is not the main mechanism, that explains these effects. So there's a lot of social psychological effects, not only for the own unemployment effect, but also when it comes to the partner. So if your partner becomes unemployed, it's not the loss of the household income that matters, it's the social psychological effect of seeing your partner suffering in terms of reduced health. That's about well-being and health, and now I hand over to Sonia.
Michael, to turn off. To turn this one.
Yeah, you just click
Okay,
for the
thank
next
you.
slide.
Hi, I'm Sonia Bertolini from the University of Turin. I'm very pleased to be here, and I've been involved in this project, EPSET project, and the book comes from this project. In particular, we are being analyzing the autonomy of youth in relation to the job insecurity. What we saw, in general, just say some of the some result. And in general, we see that the housing and economic autonomy are not anymore coincident. And due to the big job insecurity that the young people face in Europe, young people tend to have tend not only to postpone their transition to adulthood, but they tend to have problem to plan their future. Housing autonomy is not anymore considered so central to become adult in all countries, and in the housing autonomy and economic autonomy, you can see there are 3 chapters in the book speaking about housing and economic autonomy, but you can see that they are combined in different way in the pathway of becoming adult of youth, and this different way are changing according to the institutional system in which they are included. We have been working even with the concept of economic autonomy, and economic autonomy is for youth, it means living according to their needs, using the sources coming from their jobs. But the income are not enough big for becoming economic autonomy. And so what they say, the youth, if that there is not work, there is not autonomy. Economic autonomy is lost and acquired a lot of time in their pathway. This is very interesting. And they are combining economic and housing autonomy are combined in different way to become adult and to aim to be psychologically autonomy. In the book, in the project, we try to link the micro level with the macro level. And in this game of different levels that interact each other, we see also the strong role of family links, especially in some countries in which there is not an adequate institutional support to support young people in the transition to adulthood. In particular, in the book you can find a lot of differences comparing different countries. Here I just only underlined that only in Germany and partially in Sweden we find that the mediation of institutional context in perceiving job insecurity is very strong. It is allow young to become easily autonomous. Okay, I give the floor to Dirk for the long-term consequences.
Yes, thank you very much, Sonia. My name is Dirk Hofaecker, and I'm professor at the University of Duisburg-Essen at the Institute for Social Work and Social Policy. And that fits to this third dependent variable which we have been looking at, that is basically socioeconomic consequences, and we did that in a threefold way. We looked at short-term socioeconomic consequences of uncertain employment, actually by checking how young people are immediately affected in their socioeconomic situation. We looked at, so to say, medium-term effects, so what that means for young people's economic situation 5 or 10 years after being affected by uncertain employment. And then we took the long-term perspective, and this is where I'm shortly say a few words, because it's been fairly innovative. It doesn't seem to be very obvious to think about actually long-term socioeconomic consequences for youth, meaning long-term in terms of savings for old age. But we thought that it is an important topic because on the one hand, we have changes in pension systems. So there's an increasing necessity for young people to actually afford for old age income outside mere public pension systems. So we're moving more towards actually private insurance in pensions. And at the same time, as you have seen, young people are affected actually disproportionately by this uncertain employment. So young people actually, looking at the long term, are confronted by a paradoxical situation that there's a rising need for private old age savings, but due to their uncertain employment situation, young people are less and less able to make such savings. And this is what we looked at basically within our project as well. In a nutshell, the key findings were that young people actually are pretty much aware of the need to make savings for old age. We know that from quantitative survey data as well as from qualitative interviews. So they know they have to do it, but they are often unable to do so. And public pension systems, that is these kind of systems where young people are automatically enrolled, normally do not yet account sufficiently for such early career uncertainty. And additional savings, private and occupational systems rather worsen than better the situation of youth, because if young people are in uncertain employment, they are often not able to pay into these private pension systems, and they are often also not covered by occupational pension systems. So our policy conclusions, how to make the situation better for young people, would be to enlarge the coverage of public pensions, the coverage in a double meaning. On the one hand, the coverage in terms of that it covers almost all people on the labor market, and in the second sense, that it also covers insecure, temporary and marginal types of employment, so that young people acquire savings even from this kind of employment. And on the other hand, policy should actually encourage private individual savings through employers, as the UK does, through an automatic enrollment into occupational pension systems, or through public support, such as Sweden, which supports actually young people to make private savings by informing them and making savings easier. So that's very shortly on the long-term socioeconomic consequences, and that already brings us to the end of our presentation. Here's the cover of the book again, and as you can see, it is open access. Like every EU publication, it is open access, so it will be very easy for you to access and read it, and we hope many of you will do so. Thank you very much.
Now I think we can ask the discussants to come forward, and the order that I have is first Marta, then Brigitte, then Marianna, and Juliane. Okay? Good. Juliane could not make it. Okay, we have 3 discussants, and we have a little bit more time for discussion at the end.
So, good morning, everyone. Let me introduce myself first. I am Marta Escalonilla, and I am an assistant professor in the Applied Economics Department in the University of Oviedo in Spain. First of all, I want to thank to Sonia Bertolini and Marge Unt for the opportunity to participate in this session, okay, and offer me the possibility to be a discussant in the presentation of this fantastic book with the title Social Exclusion of Youth in Europe, the Multifaceted Consequences of Labour Market Insecurity. When Sonia and Marge contacted me, the first thing that caught my attention of this book, and that later led me to accept this opportunity, was precisely its title. I mean, it is a book that focuses entirely on the youngest group, which on many occasions is excluded from the analysis or is not given the importance it deserves. So this book summarizes in general terms what are the greatest difficulties that young people have encountered in recent years in the labor market. Let me emphasize that all my line of research is also focused on young people. But in my case, I focus on the Spanish labor market. So when I saw that the book was about young people in the labor market and also included a European perspective, I said, okay, I want to read this book. I think it's interesting, okay? because I was interested and I wanted to know if the results that many researchers in Spain have been finding in recent years for young people are the same as those obtained in this book in the European countries. In other words, at that moment, a question arose. Are there differences between young people depending on the country analyzed, or does it seem that young people are experiencing the same adversities regardless of the country analyzed? This book answers this question very well, precisely because it takes into account what is happening in different European countries. But let's start at the beginning, its introduction, the introduction of this book. The question is, why is it important to analyze the young group? I mean, why should we pay more attention to this population group? As all you know, during the youth state, individuals experience its transition from the educational state to the labor market. This is the labor insertion. This is their first link with the labor market. So the labor insertion of young people is a state of transition to adult life in which individuals become adults, training with professional goals and the adoption of decisions aimed at vital settlement. Thus, the labor participation of young people turns out to be a key factor in guaranteeing their well-being and belonging to the social group, and at the same time represents a fundamental asset for the generational renewal of the country's human and social capital. Otherwise, these individuals could be considered socially excluded. Therefore, the social integration of this population group has its epicenter in employment, as well as in the characteristics of that participation in the labor market. Their living conditions and their expectations of personal and family development depend to a great extent on how these are, which have profound collective consequences in the medium and long term. The well-being of a broader layer of the population depends on a satisfactory social integration of young people, but also social sustainability itself. For this reason, it is necessary to know in depth the characteristics presented by the youngest workers and their employment situation in the transition period from the educational states to access to the labor market. From my viewpoint, I will recommend the authors for future analysis to expand this introductory section with a subsection where the focus is on the importance of the time period to be analyzed. It's not the same to analyze the labor market that young people experience in the 70s, the 80s, the 2000s, where, for example, in Spain, there was a strong period of economic expansion as in the rest of European countries, than, for example, in 2008, 2012, or even 2020 with the COVID-19. So, in other words, the economic context in which the labor market is analyzed is key. There is an increasing evidence nowadays showing that the transition from the educational state to the labor market is a key period for the younger cohorts, since the economic conditions they face at the time may determine not only their situation in the short term, but also in the medium and long term, that is, through their professional career. It is found that the adverse economic conditions produced by the financial and economic crisis that began in 2008 had as their first impact the destruction of employment, as well as an entry barrier into the labor market. Likewise, the results obtained for those young people capable of entering the labor market in a context of economic crisis saw a scar effect on the labor careers of young people in terms of wages and employment. So the time period deserves special attention and explanation. On the other hand, another aspect that will stand out for a future analysis is to take into account migration flows, because precisely some European countries have been affected by it in recent decades, especially in Southern Europe. It should be noted that in the 19th and first half of 20th centuries, Europe was a continent of net emigration, but since the mid-20th century, Europe has become a region of net immigration. There is evidence showing that there may be a job displacement of natives from their jobs in favor of migration. But what happened at the time of the crisis? Many immigrants return to their country of origin. According to the buffer theory, the exit of immigrants from the labor market where there is an economic crisis frees up jobs for native population. So this suggests that there may be a job displacement of immigrants from their jobs in favor of natives. It should be noted that there was also an outflow of those young people with higher qualifications to other European countries in search of better job opportunities. Okay. Moving on the content of the book, in my case, I'm going to focus on the part 3 of the book, which addresses the social economic consequences in terms of subjective and objective individual level and household level poverty and material deprivation on social security. Specifically, I'm going to comment on the chapters one by one because I have several comments. So let's start with chapter 12. Title, Can Labour Market Policies Protect Unemployed Youth from Poverty Across European Comparison? In this chapter, the aim of authors is to know the effect of active labour market policies and passive labour market policies on the negative effect of unemployment on the economic situation of young people. And it is found that higher expenditures on active and passive labour market policies, the negative impact of unemployment on the economic situation of youth is reduced. But these results are concerned to 2013. Because the data used are referred to that year. I will recommend to the authors that consider other years an extended analysis, okay? I know that 2013 is a year considered as be a turning point in the economic cycle because a period of economic recovery begins, at least, as I know, is this the case for Spain, okay? So my first suggestion for the future is to perform an extended analysis. Specifically, it will be interesting to use different waves to compare results. That is, a year could have been selected under a period of economic expansion, for example, 2003, for example, the beginning of the crisis, the year 2013, and even a year of economic recovery, for example, 2017. In this way, the authors could have compared if there are differences in the results obtained depending on the year considered. On the other hand, 3 dependent variables referred to social exclusion are used. Risk of poverty ends met with difficulty and exclusion from social life. However, a variable that is often used a lot in the literature on social exclusion is the low accessibility of housing by young people, which, on the other hand, is not considered here, probably due to lack of information. It's important to note that in Spain there is a foundation called FOESA that produces annual reports on social exclusion. And to measure social exclusion, they use 35 indicators that measure participation in employment, income capacity, access to basic rights such as housing, health, education, political participation, and also measure the absence of social ties and conflicted social relationships. An analysis of social exclusion is carried out based on a synthetic index of social exclusion with all these variables. So it would be interesting if the authors could incorporate more dependent variables into the analysis in this regard in the future. Okay. Another suggestion for the future will be to disaggregate this analysis by gender. The young population continues to be one of the groups with the greatest risk of social exclusion, but also women. Therefore, if a differentiated analysis were carried out for men and women, I believe that important differences in the results will be obtained. Regarding variables related to immigrants, it could be relevant in the future to control if this information is available by country of birth or the number of years that immigrant has been in the country. As last suggestion for this chapter, given that the authors have the information regarding the number of months that the individual is unemployed per year, it could be interesting to extend the analysis performing a regression on the probability of being unemployed, for example, at least 3, 6, or 9 months, explained by expenditure in active and passive labor market policies. Why? Because this could set a light on if the policies have the same effects regardless of how long the youth has been out of work, or on the contrary, are more effective for those who have been out of work for a longer or shorter time, okay? Now I'm turned to chapter 13, titled Unemployment and Job Precariousness, Material and Social Consequences for Greek and Italian Youth. So in this chapter, the aim of authors is to know how young people perceive the current employment situation of the young group through interviews. As I was reading this chapter, there were 3 different concepts that were repeated continuously, and these are precariousness, job instability, and income. Especially the latter is repeated on numerous occasions. This chapter contains phrases such as, "It is difficult to make ends meet with the basic income. I don't earn a standard amount of money per month. My money is not enough," and so on. Although the evidence found here is for Greek and for Italy, it can be extrapolated for the Spanish case. It's the same. I mean, a country where the youth group present the same problems. So the question we'll ask ourselves is, why is the income of young people not enough? Based on empirical evidence, a possible answer may be related to the type of labor market in which young people find themselves. That is, what are the main aspects that characterize the labor market in which young people work? As you know, labor markets are not the same, they are differences. Specifically the countries of Southern Europe, and to be clearer, I'm going to focus on the Spanish case, which is the case that I am most familiar with, present a dual employment protection legislation and rigid collective bargaining system. First, it is a highly segmented labor market where a segment of temporary workers hired under flexible conditions coexists with a segment of permanent employees that enjoy higher employment protection. In which group do you think that young people will enter? In the group of temporary or permanent workers? The answer seems obvious. I mean, in recent years, and observing the existing evidence, the youngest group enters the labor market with temporary jobs, where job instability is high. But what happens to that young person after 3, 5, 10 years since their first access to the labor market? Why might think, okay, the young individual accesses a temporary job, but it is her or his first link with the labor market, but there will come a time when he or she will be able to access a permanent job and have job stability. However, that is not found in the evidence. What is found is that young people remain trapped in this segment of job instability for much of their career. I mean, they are not able to reach to the other segment. Thus, this duality in some labor markets has also exacerbated the difficulties of access to employment presented by young cohorts and has worsened their job prospects. Therefore, we are facing a vicious circle. I mean, young people enter the labor market with jobs where working conditions are precarious. This situation persists for several years, so they don't have job stability. If they don't have job stability, it's most likely that they will not be able to spend, save, or invest. I mean, for example, go on holidays, buy a house. So this can also cause isolation of young people, which is reflected in this book. If young people cannot become independent, that is, leave the family home, they cannot form a family either, hence the low fertility rates. What happens then? That more and more countries have older populations. That is, they have gone from having a population pyramid in the shape of a triangle to an inverted triangle. And this poses a problem for later the payment of the public pension system, which I will talk about in the next chapter. Therefore, it is unreasonable.
It's already 15 minutes, just so you know.
Okay, so I'm going to conclude.
Chapter a little bit more shortly.
Yeah, well, the last chapter is very related to this one, so I will be short here. Okay, so regarding to the chapter 14, the last one. Okay, all of this is related. What is found here in this last chapter is very related to the last one. Okay, to the chapter 13, where the term income was one of those that was repeated several times because young people consider it insufficient. Okay, so young people know that with their current income and job instability, which persists for several years of their work history, they will need more money for their retirement. But given their current situation, they most likely won't be able to save or invest. If it's saving money for the future or invest in a home on a private pension plan. So to sum and to finish, the youth group faces the possibility of an increasingly long and uncertain educational labor transition in a context of crisis and the risk of worsening income and employment conditions becoming chronic over time. For all these reasons, it's necessary to carry out an analysis of the employment situation of young people in different labor markets. And the results of this book seem to show that the difficulties experienced by young people are generally the same through Europe. In this way, it's relevant to carry out an employment policy in a broad sense, capable of responding to the problems and needs of youth in their access to the labor market, the adjustment with the system labor demand, improving employability and job stability. So this book provides a lot of information that should be taken into account in the design of such policies. We must also add the specific problems and needs of the young population as a consequence of the COVID crisis. The worsening of the structural problem related to youth unemployment that supposes the sum of the effects of the last two crises. The young population continues to face important uncertainties and challenges. Therefore, it's necessary to reinforce all these policies aimed at young cohorts, preventing a reality of low income from becoming chronic due to the cumulative effect of the two crises, which affects them more differentially with negative individual and social. Although it's still early to know the long-term impact that the pandemic will have on young people, so I encourage the authors to continue expanding the analysis of the younger population in the future. Thank you very much.
I'm looking up who the next speaker is. I think,
But the light? The stage is not enlightened very well, so I don't know.
more light.
Okay. Yes. Thank you for the opportunity for being here and you're making comments on your book, and of course before that for having the great opportunity or invitation to read the book. My name is Brigitte Schels, and I'm a senior researcher at the Institute for Labor Market Research in Nuremberg in Germany. And as my another affiliation, I'm assistant professor for labor market sociology, also in Nuremberg. So I prepared some slides, but I will not switch any things here maybe, and they are not the best slides, but if you want to like it afterwards, I can pass it over to you. But I need it here today. Okay, we already heard quite a lot also from the authors, the editors of the book, and also from Marta on the topic of the book, the research questions and the approach. I do not want... Yes?
I also wanted to need as well the mic for the people who are online.
This one?
Yeah, you're far away from the other.
Ah, it's better like that. Okay, I hope it will work like that. Yes. And the webcam. So I should have asked more questions in advance to the organization team. So I hope that works now. So with regard to the motivation of the book, I don't know if I need that anymore. I just want to add, also from my research, which is also on school-to-work transitions, on active labor market policies for the young and on job insecurity, that of course we often discuss this topic of difficulties of young people in the school-to-work transition in times of crisis, such as the Corona crisis or the Great Recession. But from my experience, we also have to pay attention to young people who have difficulties in the school-to-work transition in good times, I would say so, because they never vanish, at least completely. So how am I going to proceed now here in my discussion? I have read 2 chapters, and I want to give some more details on these 2 chapters before I get some overall comments on the books. And we already heard that this book has 3 major research questions. The first about the consequences of the labor market risks, the coping strategies and resources of the young people, and how effective policies are. And the chapters I'm focusing on are very different. The first one is the chapter 2. It's a quantitative studies on the effects of unemployment and insecure jobs on youth well-being in Europe, economic development and business cycle fluctuations, authored by Olena Nitzelova and colleagues. And the second one I'm going to focus on is chapter 11. It's a qualitative study of how young people experience and perceive labor market policies in 4 European countries, authored by Roberta Ricucci and colleagues. So let me say some more words about this first chapter I'm focusing. This is this quantitative study on the effects of unemployment and insecure jobs on youth well-being. A summary maybe of this chapter in a nutshell. So what are the research questions of this chapter? It's about the consequences of unemployment and, second, job insecurity for individual well-being. And well-being, the authors use indicators as life satisfaction and happiness. And they furthermore asks how these consequences are moderated on the state level, because there are huge differences across the European countries with regard to state wealth, measured as by the GDP, and the relative labor market conditions, as measured by the regional state-level unemployment rate. The data used are the European Social Survey, and they apply multi-level models. And there are a number of findings. I want just to highlight 3 most important findings, at least the findings that impressed me most from this chapter. The first one, and as we already heard this morning from you, Michael Gebel, but I think it's important maybe to repeat it, and we know it also from other research, that unemployment and job insecurity are detrimental to young people's happiness and life satisfaction. But that this is moderated really at the state level. And what the authors find is that young people in insecure jobs are better off when more young people around them are unemployed, as compared when just few people around them are unemployed, and also better off with overall economic wealth. But this is only in this way, like for those who are in insecure jobs, not so much for those who are unemployed. And another finding is an important finding also, that there are gender differences. I found it interesting to read that unemployment is more detrimental for men, while job insecurity more for women, although the authors do not really go into detail and deepen that. It's more like a side question or side aspect on that. So what do I think is the merit of this paper? I think this chapter really shows that it is a very important and fruitful approach to look on well-being indicators for capturing young people's vulnerability in the school-to-work transition. So happiness, life satisfaction, it's not only to study school-to-work transition with regard to outcomes like employment integration, but also the subjective consequences that really shows how vulnerable young people are. And also it is very fruitful to look on differences with regards to labor market integration, like this study does it, with differences between unemployment and job insecurity as compared to those young people who are in stable jobs. And we can see that the moderating effects of the macro-level conditions, that there are processes between the macro-level conditions and the individual-level experiences. But at the same time, this relationship does not always turn out like the authors have expected. And this is, of course, very interesting, because this shows us that the processes that work between the macro level and the individual level are even more complex than we often think about it and that we have expected. And so I would like to go one step further and to think with you, the authors, with the audience here about what could be then future questions for future research. And I think what is really important to think about more theoretically as well as empirically is to look what are important reference points for the young people, or in other words, the reference groups. With whom do they compare their situation when they assess it and make their experiences in the school-to-work transition? Because when we can see that job insecurity, or those young people in insecure jobs, or those people who are unemployed, seem to react differently to macro conditions, we have to think more about it. What does it mean for the reference groups? And another point, as also with regard to how the moderating effects really work, is I think it's still in a black box how they really translate from the macro wealth level to the individual level. So how are wealth on the macro level transferred to individuals, which is also, I think, a very important question to go deeper in these mechanisms between macro and micro level. So next, different topic. It's more on chapter 11. And as I mentioned before, this is a completely different approach to look on young people experiences and more with the focus on labor market policies. The title of this chapter, where I'm now going to comment, is How Young People Experience and Perceive Labor Market Policies in 4 European countries. The research questions of this chapter are: what are young people's experiences with counseling and active labor market policies? And when are the counseling routines and practices perceived as encouraging or discouraging for the young people? And this is approach with a qualitative approach with, wow, I thought more than 180 qualitative interviews with young people who are in active labor market policies, and some are not in active labor market policies, but in contact with counseling in 4 selected countries. And these countries are Poland, Estonia, Bulgaria, and Italy. And here I also want to stress some selected findings. And I would say that, the young people's experiences, or there are also positive experiences, the majority is dissatisfied with the support they received. And what is then interesting to read more is why the young people say that they are dissatisfied. And they say, because maybe that seems obvious, but sometimes maybe it's important to stress that they say they are unsatisfied when they are not successfully entering a job after the training they have received, and that they received training or active labor market policy programs in occupations or job segments that did not match the jobs they would have desired. What they also say that the bureaucratic rules and regulations are perceived from perspectives of the young as very not modern, outdated. It would not have been their first choice to go there. And when they have been asked what they would wish for, then of course they would ask for better quality jobs, but they would also say better qualified counselors. But at the same time, it's important to stress that the young people have large information deficits as well. They do have hardly any knowledge about which programs or active labor market policies exist and how even the labor market works. So what do I think is the merit of this paper? So first of all, I think it's really important to look in these qualitative studies on young people experiences and their assessment, because this helps us really to understand how policies and counseling practices can develop effectiveness, because they are encouraging or not encouraging. And so this approach really complements the mainstream indicator-based evaluation studies, I would say, where we always look at effectiveness of labor market programs, for example, with regard to outcomes objective outcomes, such as entry into a good job or something like that. But if the policies are not effective, we also have to look deeper why and why they are encouraging or discouraging. So I still see some limitations in the study and also want to address some open questions for future research. And I think what I missed a bit in this chapter, more for these countries, Poland, Estonia, Bulgaria, and Italy, for example, is an overarching concept of the transition regime. They are in to cite Walter here, because these transition regimes as nation-specific norms, how youth is regarded, whether youth is a preparation stage for later employment life, or whether people in a country think that the young people or that youth is also a stage where you build up motivation, try to get orientation and autonomy. These norms are also reflected in the active labor market policies. And when we discuss more on that, what is the overall aching concept of youth and how is this reflected in the goals and target groups of active labor market policies, we can also discuss more, what does success in the school-to-work transition really mean, and also success of counseling and participation of active labor market policies. And this from perspective of the young, but also from perspective of the other actors, politicians, for example, but also, of course, of the career counselors. And so to get a complete picture, we have now only the perspective of the young. I would say that it would be even more important to contrast it with the experiences and the assessments of the counselors, and in particular, how is this reflected in the interaction between the counselors and the young people as well. So, finally, two chapters in the spotlight, I would say here. Finally, I want to come to some more comments in general on the book. First of all, I want to say what I think, which lessons maybe at least I have learned from the book. I think that the book gives a really good impression which risks young people face in Europe when they enter working life, what the consequences of unemployment and insecure transitions are, and how this is moderated on several layers, the macro level, the meso level, the micro level. And when we ask, for example, what do young people need then? What would help them in the school-to-work transition? On the first glance, of course, you could say, give an easy answer based on the empirical findings from the books. What would help them? We would need to give them stable jobs and support according to their needs and expectations. But at the same time, the variety of the findings from the big book, of course, also show the barriers for such policies. Because the young people are a heterogeneous group, it's not just the young. There are young people with different orientations, different level of information, resources, and of course, different state contexts, different labor market conditions, and not every labor market can offer them stable job. With regard to the limitations and overall overarching open questions from the book, I would like to think more about what is social exclusion really is and what does it mean. And from my perspective, when reading the book, that's something I missed more, like a definition of your concept of social inclusion. From my reading, it stayed rather implicit. If I got it right, you understand social exclusion more like a continuum, for not being in or out, but by the differentiation between those who are in secure jobs and unstable, insecure jobs and unemployed, but also from this range of variations with regard, for example, to well-being, such as happiness or unhappiness. It's a continuum, but to be honest, we have to say that the young people who are socially excluded, or the so-called maybe disconnected youth, are not part of the study, not part of the book. We have to say, of course, that the disconnected youth, the socially excluded youth, are not part of most of our research we do, because they are hard to reach young people. But if we want to really say something more about social exclusion, I think it would be very important to invest more to get closer to those who are disconnected. For example, disconnected to active labor market policies, and it's not just the need concept. We have to get deeper to the need, also from the need concept, more to disconnectedness. What I also sometimes missed, although it's in the book, Marta, you mentioned it, Dirk, you mentioned it when you were talking about the lasting consequences, at least with regard to the well-being indicators, a bit I missed more this longitudinal perspective and to see more about whether there are permanent scars or temporary difficulties that can be compensated, for example, and with all these processes that have already been mentioned here in this morning, like, for example, what does it mean to poverty, making savings, and so on? Is it life satisfaction or consequences for life satisfaction? Are they temporary, or is there adaptation or long-lasting scars? Overall, I would still say that the book is a roadmap for future comparative research on school-to-work transitions, because in its how broad the perspective is of the book. It's really important to see how important it is to take on this multidimensional perspective, that one indicator is not enough to capture the risks and experiences in the challenging transition. And of course, also the methodological perspective, that this quantitative research on associations or effects should be complemented with this qualitative insights on individual sense-making in the school-to-work transition to get more knowledge and to complement quantitative research with more insights about what mechanisms could also be at work. So, and at that point, I want to thank the editors and the authors for the book and for giving me the opportunity to read it and to comment on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Marianna Filandri. I'm a professor of economic sociology at the University of Turin. And I also participate in another big research project that is a style project. And it was a project on the obstacles and opportunities affecting youth employment in Europe. And I'm very happy today to discuss this book because the first thing I saw is that the results of the two studies are consistent with each other, so they basically complement each other. So this is a very great news. About the book, there are three things that I really like, and there are 3 points that can be taken into account for future research starting from this contribution. Let me say that I focused on 2 chapters specifically, the number 3 and the number 7. The first one is on the health effects of unemployment in couples, and the second one is about housing autonomy of youth in Europe. So, positive things first. The book is very rich and considers the complexity and the multidimensional of social exclusion of youth in Europe, but also, more in general, social and economic condition of youth. One of the, for me, most valuable things is that it considers individual and household condition at the same time. The chapter of the unemployment and health, it's seminal because I'm studying in work poverty. In work poverty is an ambiguous concept because it's considered the individual condition of in the labor market. So if you are a worker with a low wage or other disadvantaged characteristics, and then consider the poverty at the household level. So this is a concept that point out the strength of the idea that the individual labor market attachment or status, it has consequences and define also the individual well-being of the household. So it's something very important for us to consider this point, because when we are talking about labor market policy or in general social policy, we have to be aware that the consequences of the disadvantage of some are relevant for all of us. The second point I would like to highlight is that the book considers simultaneously not only several dimensions, so health, housing, but also means of work, subjective and objective indicator, but also adopt the short and the long-term perspective. So it's written in the book that it takes both short and long-term perspective and examine the micro effects of young people's experience of labor market exclusion in their early career on multitude of outcomes. And it's also considered both the micro and the macro level. So there is, for example, policy. There are considered policies that are effective in mitigating the negative effect of unemployment, and this is very ambitious because, of course, there is the macro. And there is the macro, and there is the individual, and there is the household, and there is also the short and the long term. But I think the result answers greatly to this challenge. So this is a very great contribution on the complexity of the social phenomena. The third things I would like to highlight is that the book adopted several methods, so qualitative and quantitative. On the one hand, he promotes comparative qualitative research by adding the almost non-existent literature on young people's perception on labor market insecurity from a comparative perspective, and on the other and the book combines both methods, overcoming the common dichotomy between quantitative and qualitative methods that still in 2022 there is, unfortunately. And the results are in line with each other, so they complete the youth scenario and they reinforce our knowledge, so this is very good. And now, because this is my role today, I have 3 remarks. The first one is about the comparative perspective, the comparative framework. I'm not fully convinced of the choice of the country you decide to compare. I mean, sometimes in some chapter, all the European countries are considered, sometimes only 2 of them, or 3 of them, or 4 of them. And I fully understand the availability of the data, and therefore, for example, if you use USIC data, you can consider all European countries. But if you conduct a qualitative research, doing in-depth interview, this will be more expensive, of course. But there is something that we have to be aware of, as we have seen this morning. Qualitative research has been done in many European countries, but sometimes chapters just focus on 2 of country or 3 of country. For example, in one case is Italy and Greece, and in another one is Italy, Estonia, and Germany, and in another one there is Poland. I mean, all of them are very interesting. They underline some mechanisms, so they are very good. But I would expect it's something about the choices, the choice of this country. A second point is about the chapter of housing autonomy, that it's very great, it's very important. Housing is something that is not fully investigated in the sociological literature. And so this is very great. It's also considered the housing policy and the role of housing policy. And the point is that for this chapter, or in general with the housing study, I would expect something about the household dimension, both in terms of the parental characteristics and in the family destination. So the role of EPL policy and housing policy can be slightly different if we adopt the family dimension instead of individual dimension. So let me say, if you are unemployed but your partner is employed, so basically the situation is not so dramatic. On the contrary, if both partners are unemployed, the situation can be really dramatic, or can we not see the housing autonomy transition? And in line with this idea, we consider that the family of origin can constitute a strategy coping, that is a main part in your research, but can be different according to the country context. So I'm thinking about some studies that highlights that for the northern country, family helps young children with inter-vivos support, while in the southern European country, the parental support sometimes is about the housing autonomy, so parents buy buy a house to their children, or they help them with paying the rent. So this is something that can be interesting to develop in the future. In this regard, also to see the interaction between the micro and macro level, of course. The last point I would like to highlight is the consequences of health from the unemployment condition of an individual to the other household members. The chapter I read considered the partner, but my question is, what's about the other household members? There is no discussion in the chapter about the children. And this can be considered in two different perspectives. On the one hand is the fertility outcome. The employment status, the employment condition can have consequences on health status, and then can be a constraint in order to have children. And on the other hand, the health consequence can be reflected to children that already are in the household. And I'm thinking about the huge literature on poverty, on children poverty, that say that the poverty of parents can affect, of course, the poverty of children, and the long-term consequences are very dramatic for all the household members. So in this case, I was a little bit surprised for this. Let's say I missed the discussion of the role of children. That's it. Compliments for this great work. Hopefully you can consider this suggesting another future big research, and thank you very much for this invitation.
We can go now to the discussion. So we can go now to the discussion, and I will distribute microphones. Who would like to ask a question? Maybe the discussants or the editors would also like to respond to a few things.
Thank you. First of all, I really would like to thank you, our discussants, reading the book, discussing the book. It has been really great time to also to reflect back, to have this reflection back from you. And actually, I would not aim to reply to your comments, because I think we would take them on board and think further. And this is something we built together in Europe in this comparative research, that we aim for a bigger understanding how the young people make sense of building their life careers, and how policies, how this macro and micro kind of combine together. But I really kind of I just pick one, I could pick from everybody something, but from Brigitte, you made a reference to future research, possibly, that if we think sociologically how young people construct their well-being. how important are their reference groups actually, and it kind of echoed with me in our research what we did in Accept with these young people. It's one of those things which struck me was that in different contexts, young people, when they talked about their life, they very much actually referred back to their parents' generation. And this is something in Europe, in the different sides of Europe. In a way, we see the convergence inside the Europe, but at the same time, like it was visible from, for instance, from Italy, that young people, they feel that they have a harder time that their parents had at that time. And this really deprives them, makes them angry, has this anxiety inside. But at the same in Estonia, maybe, for instance, like in Estonian interviews, young people, even if their objective situation might not differ, they refer back to their parents and they remember that those dreadful times that they actually do better, like this reference group thinking. I think it's very important to understand how people make sense. So I wanted to refer back to that. But really thank for all of you.
Other questions? Yeah. There was a question. If you come down here, then we can film you.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for this very interesting presentation and remarks. My name is Noah Ryan, and I'm a research assistant at Tel Aviv University School of Education. And I was interested in, I don't know if you discussed this in the book, but I was wondering what are the possible impacts of the increase in joining higher education for this generation compared to older generations, and especially prolonging higher education. I think more people are taking further degrees. So I wonder if there's, I don't know, a gap or the whole hesitation in entering the labor market is just delayed compared to other generations. And another question I had is whether you see any effects of a lower return on higher education for this generation.
Would like to answer? Sonia?
Yeah, thanks a lot. These are very interesting questions, and we have to admit we only partially addressed this in our book, so it's not in the focus because the focus was on the consequences of unemployment and insecurity. But of course, we somehow address it in terms of also having young people in our study who are among the high educated, who also experiences unemployment and insecurity. So it's not only restricted to the low educated people where we investigated, but as our focus was on the consequences of this unemployment and insecurity, we didn't have a look at drivers of unemployment and insecurity. And they fully agree that the increasing education expansion always asks us, do these people find adequate jobs and avoid unemployment? So I take it also as a nice avenue for future research to link it back again to the determinants and the role of education expansion.
Further questions or responses from the editors?
If there are not questions, I would like just to thank all the discussants because they really say very interesting things, they underline very important points, and when you write a book, you don't really see some point, and so this has been very useful, even because we finished our book during the pandemic period, so we didn't have the opportunity to present the book. This is the first time we present it, so thank you very much. You said a lot of things, so I just would like to underline some point, for example, it's true, Marta, that we missed the part regarding housing, and because it was not included here because it was too much. And but I know that in Spain, for example, the history of housing market is very different, and very different comparing to other countries. For example, compared to Italy, been comparing Spain with some colleague in Italy, and the access to mortgages has been very different in the two countries. Also, the protection of the state through the bank when there was the crisis of 2008. So it's another important point. While labor market is regulated in very similar way in Italy and Spain, the access to owner of the house is very different. So this is interesting. Regarding the idea that you and even Brigitte said to study, to compare the situation of youth in different time, looking at the cumulative disadvantage in different crises could be very interesting. We have actually a research in Italy about youth in the pandemic situations. So you can see that the problems that we saw in the SET project that finished in 2018 are increasing in the pandemic situation. So it could be very interesting. One thing regarding the title, social exclusion. The project was about youth at risk of social exclusion. So in reality, we both in the quantitative data and in the qualitative, that we try really to integrate each other. We try to look at the sample in which there were youth not already social excluded, but at risk of, because we thought that in this group, policies could be efficacy to prevent people to go in social exclusion. So this was the idea. Okay, and that's all for the moment. We can discuss having a coffee to all to this. Your beautiful suggestion. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments or maybe responses? Yeah.
Yeah, maybe catching up on what Sonia said about the term of social exclusion. Thanks for the comment. And of course, it would be good to relate to that because it's such a big issue actually in sociology and economics. I think we took this broad perspective because we also wanted to point to the multidimensional nature of social exclusion. And I think one important one is actually the subjective exclusion. So it's not just about whether scientists define young people as being socially excluded, but that young people may also feel themselves being socially excluded, even if scientists do not define them as such. And in that sense, I think relating this subjective and objective perspective, that can be a way forward. And I take that also on board from your comment on actually looking at that subjective perspective. But I think that might be the road to take for further exclusion research to recognize and analyze this multidimensional nature of the term. And of course, define it properly. You're perfectly right about that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, just as a comment to your comment. And also what I think interesting, it could also be the other way around, not just people, scientists might define them as socially excluded and they do not feel like that, and the other way around as well. And also this is with this important issue of what does success mean. When we use indicator-based research, then we always have to define, mainly along with norms, what success means. But the young people may have other definitions of success and the other way around. And I think that's important to think in future research.
Okay. Any final comments? Otherwise, I think we can listen. Indeed.
One last comment, because we talked so much about future research. I found that so fascinating to get these inputs for future research from the three discussants, but it also somehow at least partly confirmed what's still going on. So I just want to give one example. It was mentioned by Marianna in the discussion. For example, in this one chapter, the Swedish colleagues, they only looked at the consequences for the partner. But as a follow-up of our book on our project, for example, our colleague Anna Baranowska has a ERC grant where she exactly addresses all these topics, including the children and other household members. So it's nice to see that some of the suggestions are taken up, but others, I think it's a nice guidance for future research. And I think this research never stops because the problems prevail, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay, the research never stops, but the panels do. And we'll go now to a coffee break where you're all welcome to discuss. I might add that we have another panel today on youth in labor markets. Brigitte is presenting there, Dirk is chairing it. So if this is your topic in labor market studies, you have an exciting morning ahead of you. Thank you all.